Hello, college football fans, and welcome to an in-person episode of College Football Throwdown, episode 118. I'm your co-host, Alex Schmitz, and today I'm joined in person by my dad, Peter Schmitz.
Hello there, college football fans and Husker fans.
Hello, hello, hello. So, yes, we are here together for a Thanksgiving weekend. We've had a lot of fun. We've traveled down to San Diego to visit some family and go to the horse racing, all sorts of fun stuff. But we knew we had to do a podcast since we were here together. We ended up skipping a week last week for the Nebraska-Wisconsin game and the Week 12 of college football. So we're going to cover that today, as well as what happened in Week 13, Nebraska's game against Iowa, and preview the upcoming conference championship games. But before we dive into that, we're going to do our tradition and crack a beverage, especially since we're right here.
You betcha. Absolutely. And I am back to drinking my favorite beverage, the Four Peaks Brewing Company's Kilt Lifter Scottish-style amber ale. One of my favorites from Arizona. That's happened to be where I am residing right now, so here we go. And you are drinking
the Japanese Sapporo. Yep.
All right. Finally got to try that stuff.
Yes. I brought some specifically for you to try it. So there you go.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Clink.
So to dive into things, as I mentioned, we're going to start with the Wisconsin game from last week, a week ago now. And I'm back on episode 117 of College Football Throwdown. We gave predictions for that, as we usually do. And I predicted that that Wisconsin would win in a close game, 24-17. And you predicted more of a blowout win of 38-13 with 3 missed field goals. You made a point to specify that.
I did.
You did. But the final score ended up, I was a little off on the actual score, but in terms of the spread, I was pretty close. It was a 7-point game where Wisconsin won 35-28.
Yes.
Yep. And unfortunately, and we won't spend too much time breaking down this particular game, but it was kind of a similar story of what we've seen for a lot of the season where, once again, we were worried that our guys were going to maybe start to give up here at some point in the season, right? But they came to play and played hard. This was one where I was expecting to be a bit lower scoring game, and our defense did kind of let us down a bit in that they did give up quite a few yards to Wisconsin. Their running back, Braylon Allen, who's a freshman stud, can lift crazy amounts of weight already, and he ran for 228 yards against us. So, yeah, we really weren't able to stop him. But we were able to get some of our own stuff going on offense. Adrian was actually having a good day, in terms of passing and everything in the first half. And then in the second half, he started throwing interceptions, and his injuries were catching up with him.
Yes, exactly. Well, and even the running totals, defensively we were doing okay throughout the early parts of the game. But again, when a team dedicates themselves to the running game, if you can't force them into a single dimension pass-based team because you get ahead, then you got a problem, because that physical pounding is eventually going to pay off for them in the fourth quarter, and that happened. And in fact, this Wisconsin game was a classic, right? And that running back got a lot of yards late in the second half.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we actually out-yarded them in total, according to what I have here. It was 452 to 397. We had 70 plays to their 49, partially because of some of those turnovers we had.
Right.
Yeah.
And they had a kickoff return for a touchdown to begin the game.
Right away. Right after you said on the previous podcast that we needed to score early, have good things happen early. And we did, after that terrible kickoff, we did come out and
march it down.
Yeah, march it down the field and score to tie it up. And Austin Allen had a great day. He had 7 receptions for 143 yards. And then Toure also had 7 for 113. We had 351 yards of passing. We were 23 of 35. So that's all pretty good. What's also hidden in there, of course, is the 2 interceptions. And those really hurt us. And it was unfortunately another situation where Adrian's mistakes, and once again, like I mentioned, even though Scott apparently said that he was more healthy coming off of the bye week and everything, clearly his shoulder was still bothering him,
right?
As foreseen by the fact that he got surgery on it just after that game.
Right.
So, I know you were pretty upset about there wasn't a pass interference called on the final play of the game when it was 4th and long at the goal line, and we threw a pass and the Wisconsin guy kind of ran into our receiver before the pass got there, and it didn't get called.
Right. And it's classic. Now, the reality is, even if that does get called, there's no guarantees that Nebraska is able to actually execute and end up converting that into a touchdown. But it's just another example of how Nebraska continues to find itself in situations where they put themselves in a tight ball game, and then a bad call or missed call has such a massive effect on the outcome of the game, and they could have just overcame that, right? If they just execute and do some of the other things better, then that isn't even a factor. But it's frustrating as a fan when this consistently happens to our team, and you can find an example from a previous week where a similar situation occurs, and of course it's the other way around, and it's always called. I mean, it's like always called, but when it happens to Nebraska, it doesn't get called, and that's where the frustration for Nebraska fans lands. Is that it's quite apparent that the number of missed calls seems to be disparate against us.
Right. I will say just a couple plays before that, there was a situation where Adrian threw a ball out of bounds. It was kind of an uncatchable ball, and the Wisconsin guy got called for pass interference, even though it was a clearly uncatchable out of bounds ball, right? And that reminded me of a similar situation with us, where we got called for pass interference on an uncatchable ball earlier in the year. And even though this time it was going to Wisconsin and gave us an automatic first down in a situation where we really needed it,
right,
I was still against the call because it was wrong,
right,
I thought.
Okay.
So it's not, it might just be that the Big Ten refs kind of stink, but,
Well, that's an absolute, there's no debating that. That is absolutely true. Big Ten refs suck, and the standards that they use vary so dramatically from other conferences, whether it's the Big 12 or the SEC. There's so much variation between conference officials. It's disgusting, and it really drives me crazy, because as someone who watches a lot of college football, not just Big Ten football, when you watch these other conferences, you see what they view as acceptable and unacceptable in things like pass interference, holding, etc. And there's so much disparity between them. So, yeah, I think all the officials need to have a big ass powwow and get it figured out.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one. So then, of course, there's the final game of the year for Nebraska against Iowa, since we won't be going bowling this year, no matter if we were to beat Iowa or not. And as we mentioned, we were in San Diego for Thanksgiving weekend, and we ended up finding that there was a local Nebraska bar here in San Diego called Duck Dive.
Yes.
And we went there, and it was actually a great environment. The place was packed with Husker fans, and every time we scored a touchdown, they played the fight song with everybody chanting and stuff. So it was a really fun time. We met some cool people, including Austin Allen's sister, kind of a shocker that happened to come up. And, for 3 quarters, that place was rocking. Everybody's high-fiving.
Having a good time.
Yeah, drinking beers. And then the fourth quarter comes. And then reality of the season starts crashing in, sadly.
The same scenario, same book, just another chapter in the same deal.
This one was a little different, though, because, number one, Adrian had that shoulder surgery.
It wasn't Adrian.
So it was Smothers in as our quarterback, and you could tell that Scott had altered the game plan to account for the fact that it was Smothers who's better at running it, not as good at throwing it. So we had a lot of run-focused plays in there. We had Yant in as our starting running back at the beginning of the game. There was a lot of option in there, along with a couple of play-action passes and the like. And that was working quite effectively for us.
Right.
Especially in that first half. And Smothers ended up being 16 of 22 for 198 yards passing it.
Right.
And by himself, I believe he had 64 yards on the ground, too.
Yeah, his stat line was good overall. He had one interception, obviously.
And one fumble.
And one fumble, right. And those were the key things, If he doesn't have, so you have one interception in a game in which you throw it 22 times. I might be willing to accept that as long as it's not one that ends up being a pick six. And then the same with the fumble, if you're going to run the football a little bit, that sort of stuff, and you have all these exchanges, all right, we need to concede that every now and then there's going to be a fumble. But you can't have one that gets picked up and advanced, or you can't do it in a location on the field where it gifts them an easy points, right?
Right.
So it's not just about the turnovers, it's about the type and the timing and where they are on the field. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Admittedly, Iowa also had one fumble of their own near the beginning of the second half, where they were on a drive. That helped us out. But still, we were up 21-6 in the third quarter. Things were looking good, which makes this one a little different, I think, from the past games where we've lost by one score, was that we were in the lead and frankly should have been further in the lead,
right,
based on how well we had played versus them, versus other games, right, where we've been behind and maybe made a comeback only to falter at the end. But in the fourth quarter, we got started off with a blocked punt that was an immediate score for them. Then we had that fumble you talked about. Then our defense stopped them when they got that fumble, but they were managed to pin us deep once again with special teams, good special teams on their part, and then that led to them getting a safety on us because Scott decided to throw it when we were backed up in our own end zone there. Then we went 3 and out. Next time we had the ball, and on the last drive of the game, Smothers threw a really bad interception after we had some success, where he just way overthrew it, or the receiver didn't go where he thought he was going to. A mistake that you might expect from a freshman, which he is, of course. But it was frustrating to see the pressure kind of get to him later on, and after, like you said, after he had played quite well for 3 quarters.
Exactly.
So the atmosphere in the bar died down a bit after that, as you can imagine. People just frustrated that this was the same old stuff again. So we're going into the off season, at 3-9. So absolutely not the record we were hoping to have when we were talking, at the start of the season about what we were expecting, right? This was supposed to be the real turnaround year for Scott.
Right. And we weren't necessarily expecting 9 wins, but we were expecting 6 wins in a bowl game.
Right. Yeah, that's what we were hoping for, at least. So, we know now, of course, about all of the changes to Scott's staff. We'll hopefully be hearing here in the next week or two, about who our assistant coaches will be, who from the interim staff may or may not be staying, whether we'll be getting a special teams coach. You and I have a special eye out for that one. So things of that nature. So... And one other thing I want to mention about the Iowa game was that it was kind of an ugly game in terms of our defense, because once again they were pretty dedicated to the rushing game. They had 186 yards of rushing on us, 178 passing. Early on in the game, they had a nice drive where they drove it all the way down to their own end zone and actually went for it on fourth down at the goal line, and the guy had the ball in his hands but dropped it. The receiver did. So frankly, we got lucky that they didn't get 7 points there. And then later on in the game, they kept on driving it, but we managed to stop them and make them kick field goals. So it wasn't pretty defense,
right,
but it was getting the job done of
absolutely.
stopping them from scoring.
Right.
Up until the end, which by that point, we've 3-and-outed them multiple times, but at that point we're starting to get tired, and then they have one of those runs with their running back Goodson that went for a big gain, and got them the last touchdown that got them their lead. Yeah. Yep. So in a future podcast, we'll talk more deeply about what Scott needs to do for next year. The different coaching hires, all that fun stuff. There's plenty to do in the offseason. We've teased our discussion about going under center in modern college football.
Right.
That's a fun one.
We'll definitely have a talk about that.
Yeah.
But it's just that, it's just us finding different ways to collapse mentally and not show discipline that is required for you to win football games. And again, we blame it on Adrian, week after week, and then we put a new kid in there, and he looks great for 3 quarters, and then he pisses down his leg because he doesn't have the mental toughness and the repetitions and the comfort level at that point in the season. And I would argue that's all on Scott, because a kid like that, given how beat up Adrian has been throughout portions of this season, that kid should have had many more snaps behind center so that he wouldn't have been nearly as nervous. He would have been a more mature, seasoned quarterback and, be able to do some nice things, right? Instead, he does things really well when they're kind of clean and early in the game, and he's still feeling good, and it's his first start, and we're having success. But as soon as adversity comes, he folds like a cheap tent, and it's really not necessarily all his fault, right? There's a big part of that is the mental preparation side and the ability to have had enough experiences that this isn't all shocking new during a critical moment in a critical game at the end of the year. You know what I mean? That's the kind of shit that is about program building that Scott has not understood from the day he started as our coach.
Mm-hmm. And one final thing we'll mention is that we did have a few players that have already announced that they will not be coming back to the team next year.
Right.
Included with that is Cam Taylor-Britt and Austin Allen, both of whom are going to try to make it their way into the NFL. I know there were a couple other players that you had noted.
Yes. Well, and I don't have that list in front of me, but I would say that by our next podcast, we'll have the dust will clear a little bit on that, right? And we'll be able to run a list here of the people that are staying and going, because people are tending to announce a little quicker this year than they maybe have in past years. They're getting used to this whole, COVID year eligibility thing. But it's pretty clear that a number of players who still had remaining eligibility are going to opt out, along with obviously the seniors that have expired their eligibility. So we're going to have more scholarships available than we thought we were going to,
right? Which
might play into what we can and can't do in terms of getting portal replacements for some of this talent. Mm-hmm. And we'll see how that all plays out.
Yep, that's definitely going to be interesting to see. So switching over to the national side of things, we're going to go back in time again to Week 12 of college football. And on the previous podcast, we gave a prediction for that Michigan State-Ohio State game, a big game within the Big Ten. I predicted that Ohio State would win 38-28, whereas you predicted they'd win more dominantly 49-24. But in the end, neither of us were quite expecting the level of dominance that Ohio State showed in that game, where they crushed Michigan State 56-7. Big part of that, as we learned, is that Michigan State's pass defense is one of the very worst in the entire Division I of college football.
Right.
And Ohio State took full advantage of it. Stroud, their quarterback, had a great day.
All their wide receivers were wide open and catching everything that was thrown to them, and looked really easy.
Mm-hmm, sure did. And that had a lot of people pretty high on Ohio State going into that Michigan game, though they played against Maryland, and they beat them soundly 59-18. So both of them seemed like they were figuring things out going into that classic rivalry game.
Right.
Another interesting game was Alabama versus Arkansas. I think we both kind of thought that Arkansas, because they just struggled the week before, so it's like, oh, they're not going to do anything against Bama. But they actually played it close with them. It was 42-35. I'm pretty sure Alabama was ahead the entire game, but they could never, pull away. Arkansas kept on scoring, which, is not definitely the type of team Saban wants, right? He likes his Alabamas with the really good defense that can shut down teams, not get 35 points scored on them.
Right, exactly.
Mm-hmm. And one of the big surprises, of course, was Oregon, number 3 ranked Oregon, in the college football playoff, playing against Utah. And not only did they get beat, they got crushed 38-7, which kind of brought them out of that playoff contention conversation.
The thing about that is, number one, I didn't spend that much time watching that particular game, the Oregon Utah game. I didn't watch it, and it's one of those things that's just a head scratcher for me, because Oregon had been good in some other games, including the one where they pretty much kicked Ohio State all around the field early in the season, but then they have seemed to have struggled here in recent weeks, and I don't know the circumstances. When I see that on a team, oftentimes when you get into the nitty gritty of it, you'll find out that there's some key players that are missing, right? Like some guys that got hurt or weren't eligible and that sort of stuff. And the interesting thing in this situation is that Oregon is likely to get a chance at a rematch with the Utah Utes in the conference playoff here in the coming weeks. So we'll see if that particular game looks different than the first one.
Yeah, that will definitely be interesting.
I'm sorry I didn't have more insight.
That's all right. That's all right. You're just the co-host. That's fine. All right. And then Clemson did end up beating Wake Forest, even though Wake Forest was ranked ahead of them, 48-27. Solid win for them. And another big surprise, of course, was Florida playing against Missouri, where Missouri won 24-23 in overtime. Once again, going for 2 once they scored to decide the game, and they ended up doing it. And I guess this was the final nail in the coffin for the Florida athletic department, because right after that, pretty much, it was announced that Dan Mullen, Florida's head coach, was fired, effective immediately from that university. Which was a bit of a surprise when you look at his record. He basically had a 69% win percentage. He was 34-15 in his time at Florida.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, that it looks like something where there's way more to it that's off the field related. I can't imagine that a athletic department, athletic director is going to fire a head coach who has that record, unless he knows there's some other things going on that are unacceptable to him. So there were some other reasons that must have existed that motivated the firing of Dan Mullen. Mm-hmm. I don't know what they were, and if we obviously get more insight into that, we'll share that on a future podcast, maybe when we talk about coaching carousel here, since Nebraska is going to be a big part of it, at least as it relates to assistant coaches.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And I think one other factor in it is that a lot of his losses have come more recently.
Right.
You know, like he got off to a better start, and then the past 2 years he's had more of those losses have piled up.
Right.
So, you know, it wasn't trending in a good direction.
Right.
But, you know, I said to you at the time that, well, probably all the more reason that it was good that Trev Alberts didn't fire Scott right away, because that's right there, having the Florida job open is another big job, right?
Right.
To add to the coaching chaos for this season, on top of USC and LSU and the other big programs.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Switching over then to Week 13, which was this past weekend, of course. We did have some interesting games. We had this was kind of interesting. Texas A&M, the team that beat Alabama and gave them their one loss, played against LSU, who's been down this year, but LSU found a way to beat them 27-24. On Friday, as we mentioned, we did our trip to this bar and caught a couple games there. We also watched some of the Nebraska volleyball team, which was a lot of fun.
Yep.
But then Saturday, we were watching some games as we were at the horse racing track. So we kind of caught bits and pieces of different games here and there. But it was definitely a fun day to bounce around between the different activities.
It really was. And it's so fun when even we were enjoying Del Mar Racetrack here near San Diego, which is a beautiful place for any of you out there listening who might like to go to the track every now and then. That's a place that's got to be on the bucket list for you to visit during one of their meets. But it was a really nice environment where we could pop into the sports bar and watch some games on TV. So we were able to keep close tabs on that Michigan-Ohio State game that was going on, and a few other later games as well. Mm-hmm. So it was a lot of fun to combine all that stuff.
It sure was. One game we didn't catch much of, but we were keeping an eye on the score, was Michigan State versus Penn State. And Michigan State ended up winning that 30-27. A good back and forth game. I know there was kind of some turnovers on both sides throughout that game. So Michigan State was able to hold out, even though they're technically ranked higher than Penn State in terms of, you know, the AP poll this year. I think people still perceive that Penn State is better, right? So
well, they did, and especially coming off of the beatdown that Ohio State had put on Michigan State, I think they felt like trending-wise, Penn State was going to win that football game.
Mm-hmm. I would agree. And this one I know surprised you. Minnesota played against Wisconsin, who had just beat us the previous week.
Yep.
And they ended up winning 23-13. They held that Braylon Allen, that great running back, to I think something like just 40 or 60 yards in the game, something like that, compared to the 200 he put up on us. So really good job by Minnesota's defense to hold them back.
Yep. And that's the thing, is that they just kept getting a little bit better. Minnesota, I'm speaking of, but they also had some stumbles through the season. You know, there was just a little bit of inconsistency with a lot of the Big Ten West teams. Right? You had Iowa, who was in the top 10 for a period of time and looked great, against certain teams, and then they just got beat badly by a few teams. Right? Purdue is the same way. They looked great in some games and just looked awful in other games. Minnesota, same thing. Nebraska's the only one that was consistently bad.
Well, and also Indiana.
Indiana, but they're not part of the West. They're
Well,
East,
okay,
so,
right.
So,
right.
But yes, you're right. So it's it's just one of those things where that inconsistency kept it interesting, because you just didn't know what team was going to show up on what week.
Mm-hmm. And I'm pretty sure Wisconsin's only touchdown of the day was scored off of a special teams situation, like a block punt into a easy touchdown or something like that.
Again, recall early in our game, I mean, we were scoring on offense, and Wisconsin didn't score on offense very much against us. Because touchdown-wise, but they had a couple of field goals and the kickoff return. So those are the kinds of things that can swing the situation, even though their offense wasn't necessarily having great success with us all the time, right? We were having more success. We had more yardage than they did. I mean, that's the kind of thing. So
right. And then their defense created opportunities with those turnovers.
Right, exactly.
It seems like Minnesota didn't give up those turnovers this time.
Correct.
And Wisconsin was only able to score 2 other field goals, so that's why they got 13 points.
Yep.
So,
yep. Very impressive by Minnesota.
Yes, and the fact that Iowa beat us and that Minnesota beat Wisconsin has led to an interesting scenario in the Big Ten Championship, which we'll talk about here in a minute. One of the big games was, of course, Alabama versus Auburn, the Iron Bowl. We were both feeling that, Auburn was kind of down this year. They had lost their quarterback, Bo Nix, to injury, it seems. I know he had played in the previous week. So all the signs were pointing to the fact that Alabama should win this one, even though it was at Auburn.
Yeah, and reasonably comfortable, right? Mm-hmm. If you just look at the history of this season.
Yep, but, of course, it's the Iron Bowl. You can never count out big rivalry games. And I was checking up on the score, and sure enough, Auburn was up 10-0 for a good chunk of that game. Alabama didn't score any points until the fourth quarter. And it ended up being 13-0. It seemed like Auburn had a good lead. They forced Alabama to kick a field goal. And all they needed to do was get a first down to run out the clock. And not only did they not manage to do that, but they had one of their players who got 9 yards on a run went out of bounds, which immediately stops the clock and basically made it so Alabama didn't have to burn one of their 2 remaining timeouts, right, which saved them 40 seconds of time that turned out to be critical as Alabama then got the ball and managed to drive down the field to score 7 points, tie up the ball game.
And then won it ultimately in overtime, 3 overtimes later in the...
Well, it was 4 overtimes.
4 overtimes, you're right. 4 overtimes.
It was 24-22 at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So...
Just disgusting to see that kind of... Well, it really is. I mean, again, I know a young man made that mistake, right? He's the one who ran out of bounds. And I don't know, you don't know whether he was told, recently in that time sequence, hey, fall down, stay in bounds, do not go out of bounds. He may have been told that and it just slipped his mind. I don't know. But I'm going to be willing to bet that maybe that it's more likely that he was not recently reminded of it. Now, I'm sure they may have gone over that scenario many times in practice over the years even. But did he get reminded of that in that moment before they went out for that drive? Did everybody understand that the objective was, at the end of the day, if we don't get a first down, but we can force them to, use all their timeouts to stop the clock and such, then we can. That represents time to us. Time is more important than points, right?
Or first down,
or even a first down. Now, if you can get a first down, obviously you want to get it, but only in these kinds of circumstances. That's a conversation you have with your offense before you send them out there. And I'm assuming that happened. But if it didn't, then that's on the coaches. Because you got to remind these kids, because the crowd's going crazy. Their job is to run the football and get first downs. I mean, they're not thinking like that.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah,
it frustrates me.
Well, yeah. Everybody at this little bar at the track where we were watching it, was basically cheering for Bama to lose, and Auburn had controlled that whole game seemingly, but they hadn't quite been able to put it away, right? Because 13 points, 2 touchdowns, and
not enough. Yeah.
Alabama's in the lead, right? So yeah, it's not enough with a team that's as explosive as Alabama. And then even in the overtime, right, Alabama scored a touchdown, Auburn got the ball, they scored a touchdown, and they could have gone for 2, which seems like what you want to do in overtime if you're considered to be the underdog opponent, right? But their coach didn't do it. He played it safe and kicked the extra point rather. And then Alabama, ended up winning in overtime. So I think that was a mistake. And then there was the Bedlam, another classic rivalry game, Oklahoma State versus Oklahoma, with Oklahoma State being the higher-ranked team of 7 versus 10. It ended up being a back-and-forth affair, plenty of penalties on both sides. I thought for sure Oklahoma State had messed it up, even though they were in the lead. They had, thrown some bad interceptions or let I forget, there was a kickoff for Oklahoma State had the kickoff return. They had a whole 100-yard kickoff return for a touchdown. So that was in their favor. But Oklahoma State made some mistakes to where I thought Oklahoma was going to capitalize and win. But then Oklahoma turned the ball over to Oklahoma State and ended up being 37-33, Oklahoma State winning. I know you were commenting on the fact that there were 2 definite pass interference calls on Oklahoma State defending the Oklahoma receiver that were not called, but on
really
watching
obvious.
The slow-mo replay were quite obvious.
Right. And it's just another another example of referees and their lack of consistency in observing and following the rules, leading to most likely a huge outcome, because one of those pass interferences was in the end zone. That took away a potential touchdown, a likely touchdown for Oklahoma if that play is called. So it's just funny how that works out, and it's convenient that Oklahoma's the team that usually gets those calls, but now that Oklahoma's heading out of the league, the conspiracy theorist in me starts to suggest that maybe the Big 12 officials aren't so excited about Oklahoma having success right now.
Yep, could be. We experienced a bit of that at Nebraska when we were heading out of the Big 12 towards the Big 10, in terms of calls not going our way, which has continued in the Big 10, but for different reasons.
Right.
But of course, the marquee game of the day was Michigan versus Ohio State, number 2 versus number 5. Winner of this, basically, you knew was going to go up somewhere into the top 4 of the playoff rankings. And of course, it's an important game to us, being from Michigan for so many years. That is the game, that everybody pays attention to. And it was at Michigan this year. Snowy, cold weather. So
ideal northern weather.
Right. So pretty good for Michigan, considering they're more running focused than Ohio State is, who lean more towards the passing side of things. And we actually talked about it a little bit at our hotel here before the game. You thought that Ohio State was going to win, like they have for the past decade. But I said that I thought it would be close, but that Michigan would win and break the curse, so to speak, because it seemed like a lot of things were pointing their way. It was at home. They've been playing well, etc. And it didn't end up being close. It ended up being pretty dominant, 42-27, with Michigan staying committed to the running game and just pounding that ball down their throats.
Right. Well, and Ohio State, particularly with the weather, struggled to have the kind of productivity on offense that they've been having in recent weeks. And although they have a good running attack also, Michigan's defense is their strength, of course, is their defensive line. And they were putting pressure on the quarterback when he went back to pass. They were doing a pretty good job of neutralizing their running game. They had Ohio State had a few, explosive off running plays, but overall, Michigan's defense kind of held them in check for a good portion of that game, and Michigan then just did enough to kind of get by, and then at the end, because they had again remained committed to a running game. Then leaning on those players all the time, and fourth quarter comes, and all of a sudden that running game is your friend. And another example of that playing out, and Michigan was the beneficiary.
Yep, and their running back Haskins had a career day. He was just making plays all over the place. He had a great one where he leaped over an Ohio State guy right near on their drive at the end of the game, because I remember that drive at the end of the game, they didn't need to score. They just needed like a couple first downs really to like run out the clock or whatever. But they were having so much success, like you said, because of their commitment to it. By that point, Ohio State was tired, their defense, and they were just getting some, big plays right past them.
Right.
And they ended up scoring and making the lead even bigger, right there at the end of the game. Well, and that's the
thing. They got control of the game by doing that. And that's what having and being committed to a running attack does for a football team, and especially a football team who happens to reside in the north or northeast area of the country.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and we're recording this on Sunday, as we mentioned, so the new playoff rankings have not come out yet. The big question is going to be where does Michigan go versus where does Alabama go? Cincinnati, I forget, they didn't play anybody of real importance, but they beat them pretty soundly, so Cincinnati will stay up there in the top 4 most likely. Our prediction is that the rankings will look something like Georgia at the top, Michigan number 2, Cincinnati number 3, Oklahoma State number 4. Because with
Alabama will still be in there because they won.
Oh,
so it'll probably it's a question of whether or not Alabama is going to be second, or do they slide them back maybe to third. And put Michigan where Ohio State was. I you know what I mean? Something along those lines. I think they'll keep Alabama at second for now, knowing that Alabama and Georgia are going to play anyway. So, but I could be wrong. Maybe they'll reorganize that a little bit.
I'm sorry.
You were thinking more in terms of we've had a lot of discussions about all the what if scenarios from these conference championship alignments that we have. And Oklahoma State has the potential to be one of the beneficiaries of the fact that somebody's got to lose between Georgia and Alabama.
Yes,
and so
you're correct. I was jumping the gun there a little bit. I personally think it's pretty likely that Michigan is going to be number 2, and then probably Bama 3, Cincinnati 4 in the current this week's playoff rankings. But then, yes, as you mentioned, with the conference championship games, Georgia and Alabama have to play each other. If everything else goes as we predicted, then I would think that the 4 that we listed is what the final layout of the playoff is going to be. Yep. There's still opportunities for potentially Notre Dame to find their way in there and things like that. But if the other guys take care of business in their championship games as they're supposed to, that's what it should look like, we think. Speaking of those championship games, you mentioned it earlier, Oregon's playing against Utah in a rematch from just like 2 or 3 weeks ago, right. Which typically in those sorts of situations where the more prominent team got upset and then get to play in the rematch, they do much better the second time. Right. So I would predict that Oregon's probably got that one. And Oklahoma State is playing against Baylor, because basically the winner of that Oklahoma State-Oklahoma game was going to play against Baylor for the championship game. So now Oklahoma is out of the championship game. They are definitely not going to the playoff this year. And they've had some other shakeups here, just not here on Sunday, which we'll get to in a moment. But I feel like Oklahoma State should be able to handle Baylor myself. What are your thoughts on that game?
I am less confident just because I feel like Oklahoma is a little schizophrenic. Oklahoma State is a little schizophrenic. They have looked quite good at times in certain ball games, and then at other times they've not looked good at all, in my opinion, and they seem like they were disorganized, disinterested, whatever you might want to describe. Baylor similarly, looked like they were on the verge of really having a big time season, and then they kind of got caught looking ahead, got beat by TCU, I believe it was, the week before the Oklahoma game, then turned around and beat Oklahoma the next week, right?
Yep.
And so that's bizarre, but that's kind of where Baylor's at. I really like Baylor's coach quite a bit. So I think this could be a very interesting ball game for them.
Yeah. For those who may have forgotten, because I certainly did, Oklahoma State's one loss this year was to Iowa State, where they beat them 24-21. Oklahoma State did play Baylor early in the year and beat them 24-14. So now this might be a scenario like we were just talking about with Oregon, right? Where in the rematch, the team that lost does better the next time.
Right.
But I'm still going to predict that it might be close, but Oklahoma State will find a way to win. I saw that they do have a lot of talent watching that game against Oklahoma last night.
It's true.
So that's what I'm going to say.
Wouldn't surprise me, that's for sure.
Yep.
But I guess it wouldn't surprise me because Baylor also has some pretty good talent and an excellent coach as well.
And then in the ACC, it's Pitt versus Wake Forest. No Clemson this year. None of them really competing to get into the playoffs, so that one's probably kind of down on the national radar. And Cincinnati is playing against Houston, a team that they have not played this year. Houston's ranked around 24th in the country, so they're a team with some talent. But the question is, can they overcome the Cincinnati team that's beaten every opponent they faced so far this year?
Right. And it'll be interesting to see, because Cincinnati is now treading in waters they've never treaded in before, and oftentimes when a team does that, pressure gets to you. It's like the golfer who's great, on the practice putting green and can just nail it putt after putt after putt, but then when he has to make the putt to win the championship, he can't, right? And that's what you got to see in a team like a Cincinnati who's kind of new to the party. Can they handle the circumstance?
Mm-hmm. That's definitely true, and we'll definitely, if they do win that and then get to the playoff game, I think that'll be their real test, right? Because then they're playing with the big boys on the national stage, and how do they handle that pressure? And then, as we alluded to earlier, because Iowa beat Nebraska and Minnesota beat Wisconsin, we kind of came into a weird scenario where right at the end of the season there was a flip, and Iowa got to go to the Big Ten championship game, along with Michigan beating Ohio State, which is a bit of an upset. So we've got Michigan versus Iowa for the Big Ten championship game.
Yeah, very disappointed. I think that's not what a lot of folks in the Big Ten were anticipating or looking forward to. Iowa is a team that has found a way to win. You gotta give them lots of props for their ability to truly maximize on other teams' mistakes and make them pay, and just be, again, patient with their system, their way of doing things, and it leads to a lot of close victories for them. But then occasionally they run into a team that just simply out-athletes them because they're really not that athletic across the board. They have some good athletes, but not across the board. And I think Michigan has significantly more athletes. So
yeah.
It's my inclination, even though we would look at the two games that Nebraska played against those two teams, and in both cases we lost close games and had a chance to win both games. But it was very different how those two games played out. As you pointed out earlier in the podcast. So I just think that Michigan is coming off of a historic victory. I think they're so excited. I don't think they're going to overlook Iowa at all. I think they're going to come out with a goal of just moving with great vigor, right? I mean, like they're just going to be focused, locked in,
right?
And they're going to have a huge following going down to Indianapolis for that game, and I just think Michigan's going to play well.
Yeah, we can attest from some of our friends from Michigan that there was plenty of partying going on in Ann Arbor on Saturday. Because it's literally been a decade since they beat Ohio State last. So there was a lot of pent-up feelings on that one.
Exactly.
And I agree with you. We were both kind of saying, well, somehow the bettors in Vegas had us as 1-point favorites against Iowa, even though we were, 3-8, and they had been the number 2 team in the country at one point
just
this
a couple
season.
weeks ago. Yeah.
Yeah. So that goes to show you, how disparate, the talent levels there are. And Michigan is definitely a better team now than when they played against us earlier in the year. They kind of found their identity more. Like you say, they're coming off a lot of positive momentum. So as long as they do stay focused, and don't overlook Iowa thinking about the playoff already, then I think Michigan handles that pretty handily. But if they do slip up, Iowa's a team that it makes its bread and butter on capitalizing on mistakes.
Right.
So that's what they can't afford to do.
Yep, I would agree. But are we going to give a number on this one? And since this is the...
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and say that Michigan is going to score. It's going to be 38-17. Michigan wins.
All right, 38-17. Interesting. I'll go a little bit higher scoring here. I'll say that Michigan is able to score a lot of points on Iowa, even though Iowa does have a good defense. So I'll say they end up scoring, let's say, 45 points, and Iowa gets 24. 45-24.
Okay.
Alrighty then. And then, of course, there's the game that we've been anticipating for pretty much the whole season, Alabama versus Georgia in the SEC. Even though Alabama is a bit down this year, in terms of their performance on the field, right, they haven't looked like the dominant Alabama of old, but they still only have one loss, and Georgia, of course, is the undisputed number 1 right now. Kirby Smart, Georgia's coach, has never beaten Nick Saban. He's one of those former assistants of his that hasn't been able to do it. But if there's any time for him to do it, now's the time, right? When Alabama's a bit down, you're on top, but can they handle that pressure?
Well, exactly. It gets back to that whole deal of, are they going to all of a sudden do a bunch of uncharacteristic things? And Nick is such a great coach. Is he going to figure out a weakness? Is he going to figure out that Georgia really struggles to pass effectively
under these scenarios?
Yeah, with man-to-man coverage versus a zone, or vice versa. I mean, is there going to be some little twist that's going to come into play there that all of a sudden is going to prompt Georgia to be turnover prone and throw 3 picks? Something they haven't done necessarily through the course of this year. Or are they going to be able to shut down the running game that Georgia has relied on quite a bit this year? So you always wonder about that, especially when Nick Saban is across the field. But based on comparative scores, the eye test, just watching the two teams play, it sure looks like Georgia's a more complete football team than Alabama is. I'm inclined to go with the fact that, yep, Georgia's going to break through. They are going to win the game, and put another loss in the column for Alabama.
All right. I'm inclined to agree that I think Georgia is the best team this year. They've shown on the field, multiple times, whereas Alabama has looked a lot more shaky, as we've mentioned about that Arkansas game, this game against Auburn, et cetera, et cetera. But Nick Saban is a wily guy, so I think Alabama's going to make it close, maybe closer than people expect. But I think that in the end, Georgia's better talent this year will be what pulls them through. So I'm going to go ahead and predict that Georgia wins in kind of a defensive, good battle. So let's say that Georgia ends up winning 24 to Alabama's 17.
Now I'm going to go a little higher because I have this feeling that, like a lot of other ones, this particular SEC game is going to probably start slow and not a lot of points scored early. But then as the game goes on, both offensive systems are going to find their groove, find their movement, and go. And especially if Georgia is able to establish a lead and provide some running dominance, that eventually it'll break through and start having even more success against Alabama. So, what was your score?
24-17.
24-17. I think it's going to be just a little bit higher than that. I'm going to go 31-24.
Okay, 31-24.
And that's with a Georgia victory.
Right. So we're both predicting Georgia winning it here in this one. All right.
And that's also hopeful thinking on our part, because I really don't want Nick Saban to win.
Yeah. We've had enough of Alabama being in there. And if Alabama does find a way to win, it really mucks up the playoff situation. Yep. Because then Alabama has to be in because they're the SEC champion. They only have one loss, even though they have looked ugly in a lot of games this year. But then what do you do with Georgia as a one-loss team?
Right.
Do they
who has looked the most dominant of any team in the country pretty much all season?
Right. Do they boot out Oklahoma State or Cincinnati? And so we still have two SEC teams in the top echelon, which if Oklahoma State was the one that got knocked out and it was two SEC teams, Michigan and Cincinnati, that means that three of the Power 5 conferences are getting represented. Not even just two being left out, but three being left out, right. Which will make the calls for an expanded playoff even louder than they already are, I'm sure. Last thing we'll talk about here is some of the coaching shakeups that have happened just today, as a matter of fact. We got alerted by a fellow Nebraskan at the racetrack today about some of these developments. The big one, of course, being that Lincoln Riley from Oklahoma is leaving Oklahoma to go be the head coach of USC. USC fired Clay Helton very early in the season, and it's been radio silence officially in terms of who they were going to be picking. Of course, there were rumors about so many different people. But Lincoln Riley had actually been getting more attention on him potentially taking the LSU job. And he had even said very recently in a press conference, I am not taking the LSU job. And he was telling the truth. They just didn't ask about USC.
That was actually yesterday after Bedlam. So, you're talking about he absolutely with a straight face told everyone, I am not taking the LSU job, when asked about the rumors that he was finalist or even had already agreed to terms verbally with LSU, and he sat there and said, I am not going to be LSU's next head coach. And then that was the end of the conversation. No one even thought that he was, because you would have thought that someone would have asked a follow-up question about USC, but no one did. So they did a great job of keeping that under wraps.
Mm-hmm. They sure did. And already we've seen some movement in terms of apparently took all the players by surprise and the recruits. They were learning about it as it was getting posted to social media, apparently. And already there's like 4 top recruits, like 4 stars and 5 stars that were committed to Oklahoma, have now decommitted, and many of them are from California. Apparently he's been recruiting California heavily this year in particular. So there's definitely going to be an exodus, I think, of some talent to USC. We'll see what coaches he might take with him from his current staff, et cetera, et cetera. But it's quite interesting given that Oklahoma is soon going to be joining the SEC. And here Lincoln Riley is going off to the Pac-12.
Right. And it appears that even there are people who indicated that he had been unhappy about that decision. He was not a fan of Oklahoma's decision to go from the Big 12 to the SEC. And I think wisely he understood that move was going to make winning with the level of consistency that he's grown to expect at Oklahoma was going to become harder and harder to do once they transitioned over to the SEC. And so I think he looked at it and said, if my goal is to win national championships and be at the highest level, I have far better chance to do that by going out and reviving an underperforming USC program where you're surrounded with hundreds and hundreds of the top players in the country every year. And if you can make that go, previous coaches like Pete Carroll had shown that's a gold mine waiting to be mined if you got the right coach. So.
Mm-hmm. Yep. We were listening a little bit on the radio as we were driving over, and they were saying that it is definitely a rebuilding process because USC has been so mediocre for so long now, right? And we know there's not as much interest in college football in general over on the West Coast, right, as there is in the South and Midwest and other parts of the country. So he's got a lot to still to build up and overcome. But right. Lincoln Riley is clearly a talented coach, and I think it might take him a year or two, but I think he'll make USC a dangerous force again.
I think you're right. I think he is a very talented guy. He understands very clearly the landscape of college football and how he can, negotiate it. And he probably made a very good decision for himself. Now, how he went about doing that and the timing of that and leaving a program with the recent success of Oklahoma to go to a program that's been in a spiral in a wrong direction for a number of years now, really. I mean, they've gone through three coaches. He's going to be the fourth head coach since Pete Carroll. And so that's an unstable situation, right? And but I think he sees how he can stabilize it, and then when he gets it righted, then the sky's the limit.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it certainly seems that way. And we don't know yet what his contract is, but I'm sure he's getting paid some big bucks to entice him away from Oklahoma. And the other coaching change that was announced today is that Louisiana's coach, not LSU's coach, but Louisiana, Billy Napier, he is going to be the new coach of Florida, which leads me to believe that, like we said, this Dan Mullen just got fired, a little more than a week ago, right, after that Missouri game. And here they are, they've already found their replacement guy. So from what I was reading, it seems like Billy has been offered some SEC jobs in the past, but not taken them. So I think he was kind of waiting for the right opportunity. He's consistently been getting 10 wins at Louisiana in the Sun Belt Conference. Apparently he's a good recruiter. So everybody I saw seemed to be saying that he is a good hire. Obviously taking a big step up in terms of class of program, but it seems like he's got the fundamentals down.
Right. Well, and that's the thing. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out, because usually in a program like that, Florida wouldn't have to dip down into a lesser school, that they would be able to go and get themselves a premier successful coach from a place like the Big 12, for example. I mean, with SEC money, you would have thought that they might have been interested in going and getting a Dave Aranda from Baylor, for example, and throw so much more money at him that he was willing to take on the challenge of Florida's program, because a lot of the things are similar in terms of what you want to have to be a successful program. He would be in a talent-rich state in Florida. He would be the Keystone University in the state of Florida. I mean, all kinds of great reasons to do that. Resources, money, compensation for your assistant coaches, everything. A guy like Aranda, who's been doing it at the Power 5 level for a few years now and was a tremendous assistant, seems like that would have been somebody they would have wanted to pursue. And yet they seem to have latched on to this other guy almost as if that was their target all along. So they know something about this guy, right? Mm-hmm. That they are pretty confident he's going to kick ass.
Yeah. That's true. Although I can't help also but thinking of our situation with Mike Riley, where our athletic director got his first choice, which was Mike Riley right out of the gate. Right. And everyone was like, "Ooh, well, it's a bit of a surprise, odd hire, but there must be some secret, right? Because, like, you know, he was well regarded up there with Nick Saban back in the day, and this and that. You know, he's got all this experience, etc." And it kind of turned out there wasn't really a secret plan. He was just, you know, coming here for a last stop before retirement.
Right.
Yeah. So we'll see which way the cookie crumbles with this guy.
Exactly. Well, and they didn't give Dan Mullen very much time, really, when you think about it, especially for a guy that had the record that he had. So this guy better be successful rather quickly.
Yep, that's definitely true. All right, so I think that's going to do it today for this episode of College Football Throwdown. It's been good to do one in person here.
Yes.
We'll be doing another one. We'll be together, of course, for the Christmas holidays, and that'll be around the time of the playoff games and the bowl games, so it'll be good to talk about all of those on some future podcasts.
It will.
As we mentioned, we'll definitely do a show here after the championship games and to see what the final playoff rankings are, you know, what's going to play out with the different bowl games, the semifinals, et cetera, et cetera. So there'll be a lot to talk about on next week's podcast, even though we won't have any Nebraska to talk about.
Right. Yep. And, well, we probably will have some updates to provide with regard to maybe some coaching and player movement issues that are likely to occur, within our program. So. Yep.
That is very true. So if all of you out there enjoyed listening to this podcast, you can reach out to us at huskerpete13@gmail.com. You can also find us on Spotify if you search for College Football Throwdown, or on Apple Podcasts. You can leave us a rating or review there. Please let us know what you think of the podcast, how we can improve in the future. So thank you all out there for listening, and thank you, Dad, for joining me here in person. And until next week, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.